On April 6, 1892, the Southwestern Insane Asylum in San Antonio opened its doors. It was a masterpiece of health care, a living self-sustaining community with its own crops, cattle, and even a lake for fishing, built on a 640-acre land with the capacity to care for 500 mentally ill individuals. As the community's requirements grew, more space was required to accommodate additional patients. In 1912, an extension effort was started, increasing the hospital's capacity to 1,140 patients. The titles lunatic and asylum were no longer considered acceptable names for the work being done there, therefore the hospital was renamed the San Antonio State Hospital in 1925. Around this period, the hospital's occupancy was around 2,100 patients, making it one of the few instances in its history when it had enough beds to accommodate all of its patients. With deteriorating conditions in the hospitals and an increasingly brutal staff toward the patients, occupancy would soon surpass capacity to dangerously high levels. In 1939, 5 more buildings were constructed, but the hospital was once again overcrowded within a year. Over the years, the hospital had been plagued by several strange deaths of seemingly healthy patients. Over the course of 15 days, one 75-year-old man was abused, malnourished, and dehydrated to the point that he dropped 30 pounds before dying. These are simply the deaths that have been publicly reported. According to other sources, many more may have gone unreported. Reports of these atrocities and mysterious deaths prompted various inquiries of the hospital's circumstances throughout the years, however only a handful of them resulted in anything more than minimal action. San Antonio State Hospital has been modernized, and is still in use as a mental health treatment center. Naturally, since those incidents, the facility's conditions have greatly improved, and it is now well respected. One note, the complex is listed with the state as still active, but some reports have said it has been shut down, other reports say it was turned into a nursing home. Unidentified noises are not uncommon within the hospital, despite the fact that there are no distinct personalities associated with the ghosts and specters reported to roam the corridors. Unidentified voices, footsteps, slamming doors, and even screaming have been reported. Cold spots have also been recorded, as well as the rare overwhelming sense of being watched, even while alone. Some suggest that these are connected to the numerous people who have died at the hospital over the years, while others allege that the grounds are filled with unmarked graves for those who died from less than normal circumstances. Current and former workers, as well as residents, have alleged that the hospital is haunted, claiming that it felt wrong and scary, and that they were relieved to leave. Some personnel have said that there is a palpable sense of death in the air at the hospital, and that they have saw and heard things that are beyond comprehension. One former employee said that the hospital grounds are insanely haunted, which makes perfect sense. It would be strange if a place like this didn't have any ghost. I worked there, a current employee remarked. I've been there for 8 years, it's a frightening place. There's death all around, things are heard and seen by us. The Aztec Theater, which opened in 1926, is a perfect example of the exotic theme motion picture palaces, built in the United States during the 1920s economic boom. It was built by Robert Bertram Kelly and H.C. Woods, who owned the Kellwood Corporation. It was a large structure that could hold over 2,500 people. Though the theater remained popular for decades, it was in decline by the 1970s. As the Aztec Triplex, it was divided into 3 auditoriums. The Aztec was closed in 1989. The theater has been on the National Register of Historic Places since October 1992, which helped rescue it from destruction. In August of 2000, a $20 million restoration was announced. Work on the repair and development of the project began. It was restored to its original beauty after a 6-year process. It has now reopened as a live entertainment venue. 6 people were burnt, 2 of them badly, by an explosion at the theater on May 4, 1932. A sulfur bomb went off on the lowest level of the theater, causing the injuries. The building's firefighters responded immediately to the bombing, and patrons were able to evacuate the theater without incident. It is said the events of the night can still be felt and heard. A phantom operator, In the projection booth is one of the spirits that have been seen at the Aztec Theater. The spirit in the booth used to play pranks on whoever was running the projector in the past. Perhaps the spirit is hazing the new man, or perhaps the spirit is attempting to scare away any workers. People have claimed to have seen creatures crawling across the theater's ceiling. These creatures are reported to resemble humanoid deformities. There have been many other reports of encounters with spirits, both friendly and unfriendly. The Hebner-Onion Homestead, built in 1858 for Austrian jeweler Joseph Hebner, was originally a one-story limestone home that was soon turned into a stagecoach inn. Hebner's land was conveniently located between Bandera and San Antonio, making it ideal for drawing in people who were well aware that traveling between the two cities at night was dangerous. It grew, it had a church, a few bars, and a couple of hotels. Hebner's empire, however, was on the verge of collapsing around him by 1874. The number of Native American attacks increased, and Hebner's herd of cattle was stolen from his property. He claimed reimbursement from the government. By this time he was desperate and poor. The government agreed, but the money never arrived. Hebner, who was rumored to be a heavy drinker, died in an unusual way in 1882. A carriage carrying a shipment of alcohol arrived at the house one day. Hebner began to guzzle the whiskey while at work, unaware that some of the bottles contained kerosene. He rushed into the home and fell after accidentally drinking one of the bottles. Those who discovered Hebner were said to be unable to identify whether he was intoxicated or had died. There were also strong rumors that someone had poisoned him. Despite this, he was buried behind the house by the creek. Hebner did not leave a will. The land stood idle for a while, and by the time the new owners moved in, the Hebner homestead's ghosts had already begun to materialize. Judge John Onion and his family were overjoyed to be able to reside on the property, until the mayhem began. John Onion Jr. recorded the steps creaking oddly on many occasions, as if someone was attempting to climb them. Many times when I was sick in bed, and had my eyes fastened on the door to see who may walk in, he once wrote. I never informed anyone because I didn't want anyone to believe I was superstitious or that I had seen ghosts or anything like that. Then I discovered that a large number of other family members had had similar experiences. He once wrote, many times when I was sick in bed, and had my eyes fastened on the door to see who may walk in. I never informed anyone because I didn't want anyone to believe I was superstitious, or that I had seen ghosts or anything like that. Then I discovered that a large number of other family members had had similar experiences. Machinery would turn on and off during the day, such as the washing press, which would heat up to a hissing steam on its own while being left unattended. Unusual activity persisted over the years, with dishes shattering, and the unmistakable notes of piano keys resonating in the air. The sound of horse hooves clopping across the yard was the most prevalent, as though the Hebner-Onion homesteads passed as a stagecoach and were still alive, and well in another world. The Canary Islanders had chosen prime land for their new church in 1738, and the first cornerstone had been poured. It was to be built on a large plot of land, with a view of the San Antonio River and close to the Presidio, a military fortress that is now the Spanish governor's palace. San Fernando's first church was constructed between 1738 and 1750. The sanctuary of the cathedral is built on the walls of that church, giving it the distinction of being Texas' oldest cathedral. Ferdinand III of Castile, who governed in the 13th century, was honored with the name of the cathedral. The baptismal font, which is said to be a gift from Charles III, King of Spain in 1759, is the cathedral's oldest liturgical item. Because the cathedral was erected by Canary Island inhabitants, the inside has an image of the Virgin of Candelaria, the patroness of the islands. In San Fernando, Jim Bowie, the hero of the Alamo, married Ursula de Veramendi in 1831. A $15 million renovation project was started in 2003. Today the church is still operational, and the cathedral is still at the center of San Antonio's Catholic religious activities. San Fernando Cathedral is the oldest cathedral in the Lone Star State, therefore it's only natural that it's one of San Antonio's most haunted locations. The spirit of the Apache's peace sacrifice from the 1730s has been seen riding in front of the church, as though the ghost of the Apache's peace offering had yet to depart the scene of his death. Guests on ghost tours have witnessed a variety of paranormal events, including brightly illuminated orbs skimming by, and black shadows moving about. It's very possible that the energies of those who were formerly buried beneath the structure are at work. Many people who have been through its hallways claim to have seen apparitions, and others claim it is America's most haunted church. The majority of the stories, many of which are undated, appear to begin about 1937, when the cathedral was being repaired, when bones, and even military uniforms were discovered near the main altar. It was not uncommon to bury individuals within the confines of a church. It didn't matter what people's social positions were. All of the highest-ranking adults, as well as the youngest, poorest children, were eventually interred behind the walls of San Fernando. The priests and other important Catholics in the parish were allocated the church floor as their final resting place, while the parishioners were allotted the walls. The first bishop of San Fernando Cathedral, Anthony Dominic Pellicer, is buried under the main aisle's head. Surprisingly, the spot where the Alamo defenders' remains were discovered by the sanctuary fence, it is also where several officers who died in the Battle of El Rosillo are buried at. Many visitors to San Fernando have claimed seeing faces materialize in the church's outer walls. Countless visitors to Texas' oldest standing building have seen a gaping mouth and two sunken eyes, and the appearance of a skull. It is a question of imagination and interpretation when it comes to the faces on the rock wall. While some argue that the skull-like spectral faces that appear on the church's outer walls are the spirits of those buried there, there's no denying the number of people who have been interned there, as well as the number of paranormal sightings that have occurred elsewhere on the cathedral's grounds. On one occasion, a visitor on a ghost tour stood there, listening to her guide tell her about the church's history. However, even as she waited there, her eyes was drawn to a strange man who appeared to be watching the tour. He followed them from the front of the cathedral, and again as they approached the back of the ancient landmark. And then, he simply vanished. She compared his all-black attire to the dress style of the 18th or 19th century when she sought to characterize him. She'd assumed he'd just joined the group as another tour guide, but his unexpected absence had her wondering. More individuals who have passed by the ancient, yet haunting site have claimed seeing other dark figures near the cathedral's walls and doors. Many of the ghostly shadows have arrived with hoods drawn down over their faces, according to those who have seen them. Are these visions the lingering energy of the monks who founded San Antonio and may have worshipped in San Fernando Cathedral? These shadowy figures have nearly always appeared in the back of the cathedral, and have been known to manifest and vanish seemingly at random. San Fernando Cathedral's reputation as a haunted location has developed significantly. As a house of worship, it has a natural spiritual atmosphere. However, on Halloween in 2007, the regular orb sightings took a backseat to a somewhat strange paranormal encounter. Workers were removing old plaster from the original stone as part of a renovation job on the cathedral. The walls were to be replastered, and plans were made to do so. Despite the construction, the cathedral remained open to the public. One of whom happened to be walking about San Fernando with his video camera in his hand. He photographed the church's antique seal on the ground, as well as the marble coffin in the back, which many visitors believed to be eerily chilly to the touch at times. He then recorded the horrifying sight of a man kissing a skull on the head without warning. He became concerned when he realized there was no one else there. Located in the San Antonio area of Texas, the lake is a Catholic university. The Sisters of Divine Providence created the school in 1895. The Sisters are a religious order that dates back to the 18th century in Lorraine, France. They base the majority of their teachings and perspectives on Jean-Martin Moy's work. Moy was a French Catholic priest who considered the absence of educational chances for women in rural France as a sin. He devoted his life to teaching and caring for the poor, as well as the spread of academic knowledge. Moy taught child psychology to a group of devout women who lacked any formal education, and were often illiterate. His techniques grew in popularity, and women began to open centers and institutions all across the world. Moy died in 1793 from typhus caught while caring for refugees. Moy was beatified by Pope Pius XII in 1954. The main campus was built in 1895, and by early 1896, the high school instructional program had already begun to attract students. Since its curriculum and responsibilities have only grown. In the sphere of women's rights and the female emancipation movement in Texas, Our Lady of the Lake College was a forerunner. It featured a diverse curriculum, and higher education programs dedicated to women's studies, from 1911 on. The American Association of Universities designated it as the third Texas institution in 1927. Nuns who used to run the institution, in the late 1800s and early 1900s, are claimed to still dwell there. Misty figures can be seen strolling the hallways late at night, murmuring prayers beneath their breath. One spirit is described as a lady in black, probably a nun from the old convent, with long raven hair and a terrible aura about her. She's said to be a sign of impending doom. In 2008, she was present when a fire broke out. Her picture had been spotted weeks before the disappearances of other students on campus. Students said they spotted Kennedy's figure peering out a window in the direction of Dallas, on the day he was shot. One student said, "I attended filmmaking classes in the Fine Arts building while I was a student. When I went to use the lavatory, I was startled to see my friend Tammy. When I saw her enter the toilet, I hurried to catch up with her. I grabbed for the doorknob, but it slammed shut just as I reached for it. The fact that I narrowly missed the door, which slammed shut directly in front of me, stands out the most. However, there was no one in the restroom when I entered. It's a one-person toilet." Another student said, "I was afraid that others would think I was insane or on drugs, but the nun is something else. I'm certain I've seen the nun. There's a grotto nearby, and lots of students, including myself, have observed a woman sobbing. It's strange because every time you attempt to approach her here, she just vanishes." Pacelli Halls, it's a tiny residential hotspot where students congregate, is one of the most haunted places on campus. Pacelli Hall was and still is the epicenter of the supernatural at the lake. Jack is the name of the phantom who appears in the dead of night. He's all over the place. Someone will approach you as soon as you get to the school, and to inform you about Jack. Better look out for your stuff. Jack likes to screw with new students, my roommate explained as I was carrying my belongings in. Most people who have seen him, or been in the area of his antics, believe he is Jack. He's the spirit behind a slew of pranks and ruses, including confining them behind a locked door. I was in the restroom when both sides of the door were abruptly locked. Isn't that a little bit impossible? I had to call a buddy for assistance. The janitor had to come out and cut the lock off the door. The famed Battle of the Alamo occurred in March of 1836 between Texas patriots and the Mexican army, headed by the legendary General Santa Anna. The Mexican cavalry is reported to have congregated directly across from the ancient mission, where the Alamo defenders were holed up, on the eve of the assault in the hopes of fending off their enemies. The Mexican army gathered on the morning of March 6, and laid siege to the mission where the Franciscan monks had formerly resided. Davy Crockett was one of 189 Texas defenders who backed a new independent republic, and fought valiantly in a conflict that cost them their lives. After 13 days of fighting, General Santa Anna's forces had slain every single Texas defender, while the Mexican army's numbers also diminished in the heat of battle. Davy Crockett and the other Texas insurgents are said to have taken their final breath at the area where the Crockett Hotel swimming pool and the patio area are now, which was previously the location of their execution. The site was bought in 1907 by the San Antonio section of the International Order of Odd Fellows. Though the Brotherhood has its roots in 17th century England, the mission has remained mostly the same over the years, to aid others who are less fortunate than oneself. The Odd Fellows had a strategy in mind when it came to purchasing the land. They'd start by razing the present structure to the ground. Then they'd employ an architect, and a contractor to construct something bigger, a hotel. The hotel grew rapidly. The first 4 stories were for greeting guests, while the 5th and 6th floors were reserved for the order. The Crockett Hotel's popularity increased throughout the years. The main structure was expanded in 1927, with the installation of a 7-story west wing. The Crockett had added extra substantial alterations in 1968, to suit the World's Fair. However, by 1978, the property had seen better days, and was no longer a popular stop for visitors to San Antonio. The International Order of Odd Fellows opted to sell the land, because they needed a structure that was more suited to their purposes. The hotel had been sold by the Odd Fellows to a British Columbian investor, who, like the Odd Fellows, did not intend to maintain it for long. The hotel changed hands again after only 4 years of ownership. And when it did, it ended up in the hands of a San Antonio citizen. John Blocker and his wife, Jenny, spent the next few years renovating the historic Crockett Hotel. Jenny's sister had been actively involved with the Historic Preservation Society of San Antonio, which came in useful when it came time to restore the property. It was listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1982. The Crockett was named one of the Historic Hotels of America by the National Trust for Historic Preservation. The Crockett Hotel is said to be haunted by the Alamo Defenders' souls, men who battled to their last breath. Even Davy Crockett is said to be one of the ghosts walking the Crockett's halls. The ghosts of the other Alamo defenders are said to have never left their final resting place, since strange chanting may be heard in the passageways, mixed with disembodied footsteps and the clip-clop of horses' hooves. Others have reported hearing doors open and shut, as well as seeing the front entrance's sensor-operated doors open and close on their own. When one of the Crockett Hotel's front desk employees was on duty, she saw a similar occurrence. According to her, she felt as though something had approached the front door and triggered the sensors, causing the front doors to open. Guests commonly describe cold spots. The bar, lobby, guest rooms, and executive offices are often thought to be the most supernaturally active areas within the Crockett. The executive offices look out over the pool and terrace, and are located where General Santa Anna's forces previously waited to breach the Alamo's formidable walls. The most ghostly areas in the Crockett, according to several hotel staff, are the offices. A man with a dark blue jacket has been seen wandering outdoors toward the patio area, according to the staff. That patio was formerly the location of the bar, which was built over a century ago. And at one point, the front desk manager looked up from her job to see the curtains of one of the guest rooms opening and closing across the courtyard. The only difficulty was that she knew those rooms were empty, and the drapes should not have been moving at all with the windows closed. Elevators have been known to skip over levels that customers have pressed the button for, or to open and close randomly. In 2011, one of the Crockett's housekeepers died as a result of this same abnormality. When she backed her cart into the elevator, she walked inside. The elevator had already ascended to the upper stories, leaving the shaft eerily empty. Since then, the crew has refused to use that elevator, and guests are definitely not permitted to do so, but examinations have revealed that none of the Crockett's elevators are defective. So what do you think of haunted San Antonio? Let us know in the comments below. And as always, please like and subscribe.